Hello, everyone. My name is Protibha Gupta. I am a mother of a son with autism who was a client at Holland Bloorview, and I'm now a family leader. And I'm also a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher. I've taught two classes to parents and other caregivers at Holland Bloorview, one on building resiliency through mindfulness, and the second was self-compassion through mindfulness. Even though there were two separate courses, they're actually based on very much the same teachings. So today's video will be on what is mindfulness. And I'm going to share my screen, so please bear with me. So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is a word that I'm sure a lot of you have heard. It's exploded in popularity. There's now mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based self-compassion. And these are all based out of the teachings that have been around for about 2,600 years and have been practiced for 2,600 years by many practitioners. So mindfulness is actually a translation of a Pali word sati. And so while I'm going to try to define it, mindfulness is a bit like the word love. You could try to describe it, but if you've never experienced it, it can be sometimes a little bit hard to grasp. So mindfulness very much is an experiential practice, and but I'm going to do my best to describe it. So very fulsome, maybe too fulsome for this definition, is that it's non-judgmental awareness. So really notice the non-judgmental part of the definition, because attitude in mindfulness, one teacher has described that attitude as everything. So we're trying to be kind and non-judgmental and be aware of moment by moment experience, both inner, so our thoughts, our feelings, our body sensations, which could include things like pain, and also outer, being aware of our environment, also those people that might be in our environment. So how do we really understand what mindfulness is? So we can think of it as having two qualities. One is we want to recognize or notice what's happening. And what's happening, again, could be in the beginning, you might be spending time noticing what might be happening with the breath. We have to start somewhere, and then we gradually start to include more and more in our experience and being able to be aware of more and more in our experience. So the first step is to begin to notice or recognize what's happening, and then allowing what's happening to just flow without judging or trying to grab it on. Like grasping is trying to hold on to it because we enjoy the experience, or without trying to resist it when we don't like the experience. For example, feeling tension or feeling grief could be something that we find ourselves resisting. And in my course, I explain why this might be a bit of a problem. So let's just stick with, why do we allow what's happening to be without judgment? What we're trying to do is start to understand, how is it that we function? It's not just in the mind, although mindfulness might be a little bit directing you to believe that it's all about the mind and it's very much an intellectual experience. It's not. It's actually a very embodied experience. We feel emotion in the body. Tension or pain in the body can influence how we're thinking, how we're feeling. So there may be a pain, and then we resist it, and then we start feeling a bit of tension. And mindfulness is not just about being mindful of the things we like. It has to encompass all experience. It's encompassing the good, the bad, and then what we often don't even notice is the more neutral experiences. One way that might be easier to understand mindfulness is if we can start understanding what might be the opposite of mindfulness. And these are completely normal. They're not wrong or bad. They're quite human. So it could be things such as mindlessness. That's pretty obvious. So for an example, you sit down to watch a TV show, and I've been guilty of this many times, still am, and you pick up the phone and you're scrolling through Twitter, and you're not even paying attention to the TV show that you put on and said you wanted to watch. So that's mindlessness, where you're not present to life. You're not present at all, really, to what's happening around you. It's there, it's in the background, but it's not in the foreground. Another thing we like to do is we're often lost in thought. We're thinking about what happened earlier in the day or in the past, or we might be planning for the future or having anxiety about something that might be happening. So when we're lost in thought, we're often in the past or we're in the future. And not that this is wrong or bad, but often when we're lost in thought in the past, we're ruminating over something that happened that didn't go the way we might have wanted, or where we said something we didn't like, which can lead to depression, feelings of inadequacy, or we're lost in thoughts of the future, which could be something useful like planning, but it can also sometimes lead to anxiety as we're worried or worry as we think about things that might happen, even though they may not happen. And that can learn, again, this is where anxiety can start to become an issue. And then often, also another way to describe the opposite of mindfulness is when we're operating on autopilot. We take the first sip of coffee, and then our mind is gone. Our mind has wandered off, and we don't even realize we've finished the cup of coffee until we get to the end of the cup. Or you drive to your child to school, and you're at the school, and you don't remember the journey. And again, these aren't in themselves wrong or bad, but when we're operating like this, we're not fully present to our lives. We're lost almost in a trance state sometimes, and we're not fully present to those people we say we love. Let's just go on to the next one, which is, what do we miss? I've already started talking about this. So what do we miss when we're not being mindful? I've talked about the first one. We miss being present for our loved ones. Our child's talking to us about school, and we're kind of half listening, but not really listening because we're worried about the meeting we have later in the day or tomorrow. And contrast that to the times where, we've all had experiences of being more mindful. We may not have noticed. But if I asked you to think of a time where you were fully present to your child, and you sat down on the floor and you were playing a game they wanted, and you could see the love and the joy in their eyes, and they're being goofy, and you're responding, and it's a very different experience than half listening and on the phone. So we miss joy in the simple pleasures. That's pretty self-explanatory. Enjoy the first sip of coffee. I love coffee. And so often I get to the end of the cup, and instead of enjoying every single sip, I lost it. Or going out for a walk, and instead of looking around and seeing the trees and noticing the faces of people you might pass, you're on the phone talking, or you're lost in thought. And then we can get into things that might be a little more subtle. For example, when we're not being mindful, we start forgetting that our perception of what is happening, actually happening around us, is quite influenced by we call it conditioning. So everything that's happened in our past, we're raised in an immigrant family, or experienced racism, or being a man versus being a woman, societal conditioning. Things as simple as our likes and our dislikes can influence how we see what's actually happening in front of us. The example I like to use is sorry if this is gross, but maybe there's some roadkill on the road. An animal's been run over, and someone walks by, and they're an animal lover, and their heart is touched, and they feel grief. And the next person comes along, and they see the animal, and they were very frightened or scared or had a dislike of this animal. And now they're like, oh, good riddance. Same situation, exactly, but how it's perceived is different. And then you've got the vulture that comes by. He looks down, he sees the roadkill, and he goes, oh, great, delicious, here's my lunch. Our mood can influence how we perceive what's happening. We've all experienced this. You have a bad day at work, you come home, and the milk jug is empty. And you know there's extra milk in the fridge, and whoever finished that milk didn't bother putting the bag in. And sure, there might be a minor irritation, but today you get upset, you yell at your kid or your husband or your wife. How we also bring our belief system, and that can also influence. You just have to look around what's happening in the world and how people can view the exact same events very, very differently. And even how we've experienced similar events in the past can influence how we see what's happening. So you can see that a lot is working in the background, but when we go into the situation, if we're not being mindful, what we see, we think is true, and that this is how everyone should see what's happening. Another thing we might miss is we might miss crucial information we might need to make good decisions. For example, not noticing when your coworker is maybe not well, and then expecting the same amount of work. Okay, that's not the best example. I'm going to use the example of a teenager, your child who's a teenager, and they become quieter. They don't react the way they used to. And if you're not being mindful and you're not looking and you're not paying attention, you might just dismiss, oh, they're being a teenager. Maybe what you need is, okay, there's something happening here. If we're able to slow down and not just react to what's happening, they're snapping back at us, or they're not really responding when we ask questions. Maybe we could start to think, there's something happening here for my child. What do I need to do now? Maybe I need to investigate. And we also, because we're operating on autopilot or reacting out of our habit patterns, we tend to do the same thing for example, this thing happens, this is how I react. This thing happens, this is how I react. We've all experienced when something happens and we react differently. Sometimes we're more successful, sometimes we're less successful. So when we're not being mindful and we're not paying attention and we're not seeing the information that we need, and we're not aware of how our mood is, it's very easy just to react as opposed to respond. I hope that makes sense. So there's many, many benefits of being mindful. I've experienced them, which is why I teach this. I continue to experience them. It's not as if you're mindful once and everything becomes hunky-dory. It's an ongoing practice. It's a practice you do for the rest of your life. And in another video, I'll talk about how do you start beginning to become more mindful through meditation. And so I'm just going to quickly go through, because when you're being mindful, you're trying to stay in the present moment by being aware and paying attention to what's happening moment by moment. Your mind and body and heart actually are all in the now, if you want to call it that way. So being in the moment helps the body calm down, and it allows, if it needs healing, it can allow some healing to happen. And it's in the same way, being in the moment helps lessen anxiety, stress, and rumination. It's not that they go away. It's partly they start settling down, and partly we're able to have the ability to change our attitude towards what's happening, including happening towards the anxiety or the rumination or the pain or whatever it is our struggle is. As we begin to see how our mind works and how our habits are, how our habitual patterns are, we can start thinking about, this doesn't serve well. I want to be closer, but what I'm doing is making me further away from the people I love. So we can start making new choices, maybe better choices. We begin to respond more, we react less. And as we do all of this stuff, we begin to see situations more clearly. We're more present for our loved ones. We're more open. We're present to our lives. We're more joyful. We're calmer. I could just go on and on. For me, one of the biggest benefits has been, I've always been resilient, but I was resilient because I had to be. I was, as people who have, loved ones in their life with challenges, we all know it can be hard sometimes. And so for me, I always thought, if I can stay strong for everybody else, I need to be resilient. And therefore I never gave myself a chance to really see how much my body was suffering, how closed off I had to be. And so as I became more mindful, now I'm resilient because I have techniques and tools that can help me. Things like loving kindness, which makes me feel more connected to people and less isolated. I practice self-compassion, and I'll be doing a separate video on that, which helps me self-soothe when things go wrong. And then it just works with mindfulness, and it makes all of these things unfold even more. So thank you for listening. Hopefully you heard something that might pique your interest, and that if you're interested, I'm hoping to teach at least a few more classes this year, and maybe I'll see you there. I'm just going to stop the sharing. I wanted to thank you and see you on the next video. Take care.